All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to Design Systems Choose Your Own Adventure with Geri Reid. I'm really excited to have her at this event. So Geri is a design systems and accessibility consultant. She's worked for big banks as well as newspapers, and she currently works for Just Eat Takeaway, which many Dutch audience members will know under its Dutch name, Thuisbezorgd. And she does accessibility there as well as design systems, I believe. She also made lots of resources to make the web content accessibility guidelines easier to understand for designers. She's a big accessibility documentation and design systems nerd, which is great. It's awesome to have her around. And she will talk about choosing your own adventure and figuring it out as we go along. I'll like to give the virtual mic to Geri.
Hey folks, thanks so much for having me. So if we haven't met, I'm Geri. I'm a design systems and accessibility consultant from London. Thank you so much for having me along today and for the invitation. I'm very privileged to be here. As a visual description, I'm a white woman with mid-length brown hair who wears nerdy black glasses. I'm here in my home office standing in front of a wallpapered wall, which I like to think brings Victorian goth vibes rather than looking like something from my nana's caravan. So I've been designing for the web for more than 20 years. I started off with two big investment banks, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and UBS. The past 8 years, I've worked as a design and accessibility lead for design systems that feed UK retail banking brands like Lloyds and Halifax, media brands like The Times and The Sun, and more recently at BPP and Just Eat. So last week I closed out the Zero Height Converge Design Systems Conference with a longer version of this talk. Because you're a much more sensible audience, I've given it a good edit down and removed most of the cheap laughs. After the edit, I think perhaps a more fitting title for this talk would be Design Systems Notes in the Margin. After 8 years of exploring the world of design systems, I've embarked on a new journey as lead accessibility specialist at Just Eat. Over the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to demonstrate how the skills you're all gaining working in design systems are highly transferable and will help you to navigate any new challenge. So the inspiration for this talk came from rediscovering a stack of old Choose Your Own Adventure books. Like many kids growing up in the 80s, I was obsessed with these books. If you've never experienced the joy of reading one, the stories present you with choices, and by following different pathways, you can choose a different ending. What I did start to notice reading through my old books is I'd left myself notes. There were these endearing little scribbles on the pathways to take written in my scrappy little 8-year-old handwriting. Things like drive off cliff, or the more sinister get eaten by dinosaur. These notes are where the spark for this talk ignited. Imagine if past you had left notes in the margin for future you, telling you what to do. Fast forward to 2024, and I found myself stepping into a role with no playbook. I'd worked on accessibility within design systems for years, but I'd never had a dedicated accessibility role, and Just Eat had never had an accessibility specialist. Like in my Choose Your Own Adventure books, I thought I'd rely on my notes in the margin from my years in design systems to try and navigate this new challenge. If you've ever attended a writing workshop, you're probably familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Since this talk is about choosing your own adventure, I'm borrowing Campbell's 3-act story structure, starting with the call to adventure, journeying down the road of trials to return with the elixir. Starting with Act 1, the call to adventure. In the of my new accessibility role, the skills I learned in design systems have helped me decide on a direction, plan a route, and work out how to measure progress. Starting with decide on a direction, I needed to understand the problems I was facing so I could plan my route ahead. When I worked as a UX lead in design systems teams, I solved problems with design thinking. I was no longer in a design role, but I decided to tackle the discovery stage of my new job using some models from my trusty design thinking toolbox. The first thing I did was build out a stakeholder map of my core direct and indirect stakeholders. This helped me understand who the key players were in my new org and where my circle of influence extended. I did a gap analysis. I spoke to 60 stakeholders and asked everyone the same three questions. What's the current state of accessibility in your product or feature? Where would you like it to be? And what's the gap? From there, I identified some problems and turned them into how might we statements. This is my favorite design thinking exercise because it reframes problems as questions. It helps you explore a wide range of opportunities before rushing to an obvious solution. Design thinking is such a cool way of solving problems that I think it should be taught in schools. I ran some workshops at a central London secondary school where we designed apps to solve a problem in our local community, and we did it all with Sharpies and paper. We used design thinking models like empathy maps to understand our users better and did some journey mapping to identify where our product could be useful to them. None of this is particularly groundbreaking, but it shows how the design thinking skills you learn on a design system can be applied to any problem, whether you're making stuff with a bunch of kids or figuring out a new job. The note I'd leave for my future self in the margin would be solve problems using the tools you have. So I had an understanding of the structure of my new org and the problems I was facing. The next step was to plan a route to map the course of my new adventure. Many design systems begin with workshopping a vision and principles to guide strategy and direction. A vision should be ambitious and principles should reflect your values and set out how you're going to act. In a big design system, having someone raise an eyebrow and say, are we really doing the hard work up front to make it easy for our users, or whatever principle you've set, it holds everyone accountable, and I like that. So I use my years of experience in shaping design systems to write my own vision and principles. People might scoff at this exercise for a team of one, but in the absence of team members, I needed words to hold me accountable to my mission. If you ever need a starting point for writing a set of principles, Jeremy Keith did an excellent talk and a whole deep dive on them at the WDC conference back in 2022. I'd recommend you check it out. Road mapping, yikes. As a design lead on a systems team, writing a vision and principles were well within my comfort zone, but roadmaps were a different story. When I worked on a design system, the roadmap was often a list of outputs, like this example from Pi, our design system at Just Eat, to research, design, and build the components that consuming teams needed and to support them. I'd never had to make an accessibility roadmap from scratch, so I looked to some experts for inspiration. I got recommended this O'Reilly book called Product Roadmaps Relaunched, which was really helpful. The most important things I learned about roadmaps is to always consider your audience and present the level of detail that will be meaningful to them. If you present your roadmap to different people, you might need to set it out differently. Focus on the outcomes, not the outputs, and align your roadmap to a higher level business goal. My advice here might be eye-rollingly obvious to anyone in product management, but starting this new job, road mapping was all new to me. My notes in the margin here. If you're a designer or an engineer working on a design system, you're likely surrounded by folks with product management and planning expertise. Make the most of this, get involved in road mapping and learn from the pros. The dark arts of Jira are highly transferable and could be invaluable in a future role. The next stop on my adventure was working out how I was going to measure progress. As a disclaimer, I have dyscalculia, so I don't bring a lot of measurement skills to the table. For context, I once ordered an 11 centimetre bathroom blind. Turns out that's quite small, and 100 kilograms of wild bird food, which turns out when a truck delivers it is quite a lot. Based on these credentials, you are welcome to wholeheartedly disagree with the opinion on metrics I'm about to share, which is you cannot accurately quantify the return on investment of a design system. In every design system I've worked on, the business inevitably asks, what's the ROI? How much money has the design system saved us this year? I've noticed that podcasts and talks on measurement are always really popular because we as explorers are searching for the holy grail, a magic metric to measure the monetary ROI of a design system. But that metric doesn't exist. Components alone have limited value, and once they're integrated into a product, their value gets diluted and absorbed by the complexity of the entire product infrastructure. In a design system, we measure things like the number of components we've built, products or teams using the system, or contributions we've received. These are useful measures for the team to see progress, but no matter which way you bend them, none of these will accurately tell you how much money the design system has saved the company without it being a massive guesstimate. For me, the return on investment isn't about a monetary figure anyway. It's about outcomes like building for future scale, cross-team collaboration, increasing speed to market, and creating a cohesive brand. Being asked what is the return on investment for accessibility seems even more of a stretch. Last month, I joined Ben Callahan on his podcast, The Question. Each week, Ben poses a question to the design systems community, and if you answer it, you get access to the raw data from this question and all the previous episodes. If you're researching stuff in the design system space or just want an industry vibe check, I'd recommend signing up. It's a really useful resource. For our session, we asked the wider design systems community how they measure accessibility in their products and design systems. Unsurprisingly, there is no magic metric here either. In fact, 27% of the 60 people who pitched in admitted they don't measure product accessibility at all. The teams that do measure accessibility suggested metrics like tracking the number of technical fails, scores from automated testing tools like Axe or Lighthouse, the net sentiment or satisfaction scores from customer surveys, and for apps, comparing the number of users with accessibility settings enabled to other metrics like conversion rates. This is something we've been looking at Just Eat. If you download an app and agree to the terms, the app can see if you have accessibility settings enabled on your device. We obviously can't make any assumptions about users based on these settings. They don't infer someone has a disability. They just have a preference for consuming apps a certain way. We record a significant number of user sessions with accessibility settings enabled, so should prioritize designing and building with those user needs in mind. Do users with accessibility settings convert? Do they spend more or less than other users? This maybe gets you closer to a metric the business might care about. If anyone on the call has found other useful measures of accessibility, I would love to have a chat afterwards about what you're doing. Everyone on Ben's call agreed the most impactful metric is getting the CEO to watch one blind customer struggle to use their product with a screen reader. In my experience, this is worth more than any ROI chart. So what are my notes in the margin here? Be realistic about imperfect measurements when that's all you have, and stop apologizing for not delivering metrics that don't exist. What matters is using the data you have to drive meaningful change. I'm here to champion users with disabilities and impairments, advocating for their best possible experience. Whatever metrics help me to achieve that are good enough. So we've made it through Act 1 relatively unscathed. We've taken up the call to adventure, planned our route, made a map, and scoped out some mediocre forms of measurement. Join me for Act 2, where we set off down the road of trials. In Act 2, we'll learn to speak the language of the people, then bring folks along with us on the journey. Starting with speaking the language of the people. Over my years in design systems, I've learned to stop writing for myself and started writing for my users. The user onboarding Super Mario power-up analogy always comes to mind here. Consumers don't care about your product, they just care about the uplift it gives them. If we can reframe this for design systems, consumers don't care that you've just spent the last month handcrafting 170 button variations in Figma. They just want a button. In my first systems role, my manager used to print out my long, turgid team update emails detailing everything the systems team had done that month and write, "Why would I care?" in red pen across the top. This might sound harsh, but it was the best feedback I ever received because that question echoes in my mind every time I write. No one cares what the design system team does, they just care about how it makes their job easier. Learning to communicate the consumer uplift in short, targeted comms while working on a design system is a highly transferable skill. As a nerd, another valuable written communication skill I gained from my time in design systems was learning to write component specs and technical docs. What makes good technical documentation? For me, it's clarity, so written in plain language that's easy to follow. It must be concise and relevant for users in both location and content. For process, I learnt heavily on diataxis, which is a systemic approach to authoring technical docs. It breaks down documentation into 4 distinct types: tutorials, how-to guides, reference guides, and explanation. This circles back round to knowing your user and the type of documentation they need to solve their problem at that moment. In my accessibility role, these research and technical writing skills have proved a huge asset. One of my first tasks was advising on the implications of the European Accessibility Act for Just Eat. Being able to read long, complex docs and present them in a way your audience understands is an incredibly transferable skill. My notes in the margin: use your time on a design system to master writing for your user. Simplify the complex, choose the right format, and always lead with the win. The next step on the road of trials is bringing people along for the road trip. In this stop on our journey of discovery, we're going to look at the tactics of selling systems. Like it or not, in a design system, you're always selling something. I've never worked in sales, so I Googled whether salespeople use methodologies to sell stuff in the same way I apply design thinking models to my work. Turns out one of the most popular sales methodologies is called SPIN. This stands for situation, problem, implication, need, payoff. Let's apply this model to selling a design system. The situation. The need for accessibility often arises when you notice your digital products lack cohesion, they're slow to build and maintain. The problem? This is probably because you're managing 20 siloed code repos, each serving up 1,500 variations of a button. The implication? It takes 2 years to bring anything to market and your product looks a bit of a mess. The need payoff? You need a design system. Once the system is up and running, you'll need to repeat this process to get teams on board, empathize with their situation, understand their problems, outline the implications of not adopting the system, and convince them of the payoff if they do. You might have to tailor your pitch to each team based on their priorities. And the selling doesn't stop once they're using the system. You have to keep reselling the idea to maintain engagement through your office hours, Slack support channels, or newsletters. My notes in the margin here: to succeed in design systems, you must become a master of effective persuasion. You might have gone to design the systems thinking you'd be dragging a few rectangles around, but you're becoming an experienced salesperson. Learn to sell the wins. In my role as an accessibility specialist, I'm constantly selling accessibility at every level. Embrace the sales experience a design system offers. It's a highly transferable skill. So we face the trials on the road by learning to speak the language, then invited folks along for the trip. The third act of the hero's journey is called Return with the Elixir. After 8 years of design systems adventures, I think the fundamental skill I've returned with is simply thinking in systems. Because design system has the word system in it, we automatically equate this with systems thinking. But a lot of what we do is actually analytical thinking. Analytical thinking is zooming into the small details, taking things apart to see how they work. In the case of design systems, we reduce a product to its smallest parts, the tokens and components, fine-tuning these individual parts for functionality, usability, and accessibility. Systems thinking is where we zoom out to see how these small parts function within a larger system, helping us understand why things work the way they do. The design systems fit within the organization, the product infrastructure, strategy, and the company culture. I'm thinking maybe if analytical thinking and systems thinking hooked up and had a baby, it might be called design systems thinking. Systems thinking helps maintain a long-term vision for the design system's evolution, while analytical thinking ensures the implementation is sound and meets user needs. The reason I think a design system skill set is so unique is because you're constantly switching between these levels of zoom. Regardless of whether you care to give these things a label, for me, thinking in systems is the elixir, the superpower you gradually develop working on a design system. It gives you the ability to zoom into a design and instantly spot styles or patterns that won't scale beyond a single token screen pattern or product. It allows you to zoom out and anticipate the consequences a change will have across a whole product org. If you're interested in learning more about different types of thinking, I would recommend going down the wormhole of Russell Ackoff's talks. Ackoff was like the godfather of systems thinking. If you search like YouTube, Russell Ackoff systems thinking, there's some iconic talks he did in the mid 2000s. He talks through processes of things like building cars, but the parallels to design systems are just uncanny. You'll find yourself furiously nodding along. So we've nearly reached the end of the road. Our adventure has taken us through design thinking, strategy, road mapping, metrics, comms, documentation, sales, and thinking in systems. If you work on a design system, it's time to congratulate yourselves on LinkedIn. I would hire a person with one of these skills, let alone 8. If you'll afford me one final detour on our design systems adventure, I would like to invite you down a rabbit hole I fell into writing this talk. While immersing myself in the nostalgia of choose your own adventure stories, I found this incredible project by a data viz designer called Christian Swinehart. Swinehart has created a project that takes my childhood notes in the margin to another level by mapping the pathways of 71 choose your own adventure books as part of an epic data viz project. If you click into a book, you can see the branching paths of each story mapped out as a tree of decisions, each choice connecting to the next. You can explore the implications of every path and every decision. Even if these books don't hold any nostalgia for you, this is a stunning data visualization on an epic scale. It's essentially a design system for the layout of choose your own adventure stories. You can even download the data set in Excel. This is the mega advanced version of the system I tried to create as a kid. It's like past you leaving future you notes in the margin on an epic scale. So I set to work rereading the books armed with these spreadsheets. After 3 books, I was bored. Turns out the fun isn't always about making the right choices. It's in the dopamine hit from the variable reward of not knowing. Knowing where the road will take you in advance and always being guaranteed a win takes away a lot of the fun. Whatever skills you take away from your time in design systems, remember this. Design systems are about the journey, the incredible people you meet, the community, the rabbit holes of discovery that consume you, and the endless possibilities you uncover along the way. Your destination might be just the beginning. Thank you.
Wow, lots of hearts, lots of claps in the virtual room here. Lots of good comments too. Someone said you explained everything so clearly, such an engaging way. Thank you so much, Geri. A few more comments like that. Yeah, really cool. We're seeing the same in the NL design system community. I think that like the power of communities is huge. And it's like unlocking so many other things in addition to just like, yes, we're building a design system together, but we're doing so much more, right?
No, I completely agree on the community side. And it's events like this that bring everyone together and get people talking about design systems that are so fantastic. For me, it's the people I've met in the community that's been the great thing, and all the connections.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any questions, do feel free to put them into the meeting chat. If you have any questions for Geri, someone asked, do you have a source that explains how to imagine the number of people with accessibility settings enabled?
Do I have a source? Yeah, our very clever engineers have actually built a dashboard where they're able to query the stuff from devices and present them back. I don't know how they do it, by the power of grayscale, probably something very technical. Yeah, obviously that data is available to you from devices if people agree to the terms of using your app, but it's a really interesting one. I mean, a lot of people have accessibility settings enabled. I mean, even, me, I bump up the text size now on my phone. My children call it boomer phone because it's got such large type on it. But, everyone, it just shows that we're all edge cases. You have this idea that, people with disabilities are sort of access things in a different way to everyone else, but it's not necessarily the case. Everyone has their own user preference and their own way that they like to interact with the internet. So yeah, that was a very roundabout way of saying I don't know. But I can certainly find out.
I think that's actually Robert shared a link in the chat as well to apt.org, and I think they've done something similar. Like they've looked at user preferences too that people have used, and they've put some tables for that online as well.
I have looked at that before. Yeah, there's a huge number of people who actually change their settings. That's definitely worth a rummage.
Yeah, great way to show like how many times it's actually being used. You mentioned that you looked at the European Accessibility Act for your current work. Do you have any main, sorry for the pun, takeaways?
I guess my main takeaway is I feel like there isn't enough momentum. Like people are just not talking about it enough. It obviously is going to affect all firms within certain, areas of the private sector, and not just companies based in Europe, companies selling in Europe. So it's going to take people. It's kind of worrying me that there isn't enough momentum behind it by big corporates. But I guess that will all change when it comes into play June, maybe a year or so later, when we start getting some litigation off the back of it. It'd be interesting to see how that rolls out. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantastic initiative just to make things more accessible to everybody using. I guess it's not just the internet as well. I mean, it covers like physical devices, ATMs, ticketing machines, things like that, which all need, a serious effort in terms of, usability and accessibility. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a much needed thing. I just wish in the UK we would have similar legislation.
Me too. Yeah, that'd be cool to see it kind of go further, right? We got one question from Robert, who asked, oftentimes you don't know what folks are building with the design system. How do you engage them to sell success stories?
Oh, so you don't know what folks are building. Yeah, I mean, when I worked for Lloyd's Banking Group, I worked on Constellation. The design system was consumed just everywhere by, tiny sort of little parts of the business that would say just use the buttons or just use one aspect of it. And it's a difficult thing when you're not actually aware of who's using it. I guess it's just keeping the message going and just keeping the engagement up everywhere. I mean, there's so many different ways of going at it, and I think you just need to try and be all over it. You might have a Slack support channel, you might have office hours, or a drop-in clinic or something like that. Invite people along to anything. I mean, I'm very much a kind of work in the open design systems person, where any crits or reviews or anything to do with the system I would just have as an open invite, so people could pitch up and see what we were up to. Yeah, just talk at lunchtime things, brown bags, anywhere that will have you. I'm the same with accessibility, just always kind of shouting my message out. I think you feel like in a design system you're kind of over communicating, but I just don't think you can over communicate, because yeah, a lot of what you say just goes unheard and you have to keep hitting people over the head with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Can I
Steph
answer the
is, yeah, sorry.
can I answer the can I answer the next question, which is, are you
Sure.
wearing Figma socks right
Yeah.
now? I mean, massive props to those Figma socks. They are the most comfortable socks. I don't think they're giving them away anymore, but yeah, if you're able to get your hands on a pair, I'd highly recommend them. Okay, on to more serious
Noted.
issues.
Yeah, next question is from Steph. What about the moral, ethical dimensions of recording user accessibility settings? Like some users, they don't want to share health-related information, but
Mhm.
disabled people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge moral and ethical decision. I mean, obviously with a web browser, you can't infer that anyone's browsing using an assistive tool, and rightly so. You can't tell if someone's using a screen reader or anything else. I really hope that's always the case, because these are very personal and private things that you shouldn't have to share with everyone. I guess in terms of apps, if you are using an app, you're downloading it and agreeing to the terms. In terms of what I can see, visibility on people's data, I can't see actual users. I can just see how many people are using certain settings. So from that aspect, I'm not sort of taking it back to an individual user perspective. But yeah, it's certainly something to bear in mind and something I'm always aware of.
Yeah, and I guess it's not your goal, right, to get as much data from people, as much personal data as possible. You want to know about the accessibility settings mostly, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have no interest in I have interest in the people, obviously, as people, but in terms of,
Yeah.
these are just sort of stats and numbers. I mean, for me, if I can prove a certain number of people are engaging with, say, an increased type setting, then, it gives me that, to be able to sort of prioritize and ask teams to prioritize designing with those users' needs in mind, which is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've got one last question that goes into the EN 301549 for the lovers of the details, I guess. Um, so it's about flaws in user preferences,
Oh my
chapter
goodness.
11.7. Do you have any
Oh,
favorite features in that are the most important to check? Or are you throwing
that
you in
is
front of a
that
bus
is
now?
that is the nerdiest question I've ever been asked. To be as someone with dyscalculia, the fact it's called EN 301549, I literally can't remember that. I have to have it bookmarked. Oh, I wish you'd thrown a WCAG question at me, because I'm pretty good at WCAG. This is my first role which has just covered Europe, or has covered Europe. Everything I've done previously has been UK based, so I haven't really had to engage with this specific standard. User preferences, what does that cover?
So I, yeah, I think I'll also have to look it up actually.
I,
So I think we'll have to do
I'm
this afterwards.
I'm so
Um,
glad you have to look that up. It makes me feel a lot
yeah,
better about that specific standard.
yeah, it's Yeah, it's about user preferences, right? I don't know what the exact clauses are there either. So we'll have to ask Marcus offline, I guess, about this one. Yeah. So thank you very much, Geri, for joining us. Yeah, really awesome to have you here today. And yeah, thanks for your brilliant talk on design systems.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm on LinkedIn and other social platforms. If anyone wants to circle back around to anything I'm talking about, please do. And I'll pitch in on your Miro board with some stuff. So lovely. Thank you for having me.